"Are you my new daddy?" 6-year-old Mason Bennett asked me that question with one sneaker untied and a smear of strawberry jam at the corner of his mouth. And somehow those 6 innocent words frightened me more than anything an adult had ever said. I was kneeling in the narrow entryway of the Bennett house, trying to fix the knot in his shoelace before the school bus reached the corner, when Mason placed one small hand on my shoulder and looked directly into my eyes. Behind us, I could hear a cabinet door close in the kitchen. Then silence. Ryan had heard him. I knew he had. Mason tilted his head, waiting with the kind of patience only a child could mistake for patience, because he had no idea he'd just asked a question that could change 3 lives. "Well," he prompted. My fingers stopped around the laces. I should have laughed it off. I should have told him I was just Caleb, the neighbor who helped with homework and occasionally burned pancakes on Saturday mornings. Instead, the word yes rose so quickly inside me that I had to swallow before it escaped. That was the part one wasn't prepared for. Not Mason's question. My answer. I looked toward the kitchen and found Ryan standing beside the counter, still holding Mason's blue lunchbox. He was 34, usually impossible to read, the kind of man who could hide an entire bad day behind one quiet smile for his son. But there was no smile now. His eyes met mine, and something passed between us that neither of us was brave enough to name. "Mason," Ryan finally said, his voice gentle but strained. "The bus is going to be here any second." Mason frowned. That's not an answer. He had Ryan's stubbornness. I almost smiled, but my chest felt too tight. Outside, the yellow school bus turned onto the street, its brakes squeaking as it approached our block. Mason grabbed his backpack, apparently deciding the adults in his life were hopeless. "Think about it," he told me seriously, as though he'd offered me a job and expected my decision by dinner. Then he ran outside. Ryan and I followed him onto the porch. The September morning was cool enough for jackets, and fallen leaves skittered across the sidewalk while Mason climbed onto the bus. He pressed his face to the window and waved with both hands. Ryan waved back. So did I. For one strange second, reflected faintly in the bus window, the 3 of us looked exactly like what Mason apparently believed we were. A family. The bus pulled away. Neither Ryan nor I moved. "I'm sorry," he said at last. "Don't be. He's 6. He gets attached." "Ryan, you don't have to explain." That was exactly what I said, even though I desperately wanted him to explain everything. Why he'd let me become part of their mornings. Why my coffee mug had somehow earned a permanent place beside his in the kitchen cabinet. Why Mason had started saving the seat next to Ryan for me at dinner. Why Ryan sometimes looked at me like he wanted to say something, only to glance away before the words arrived. Instead, he stared down the quiet street and whispered, "I should have seen this coming." I didn't know then that one child's question would expose every feeling we'd spent months pretending wasn't there. I didn't know Ryan would soon push me away because he was terrified of what staying might mean. And I definitely didn't know that an empty chair would eventually force him to choose between protecting his heart and opening his home. All I knew was that morning, standing 3 feet from Ryan Bennett, I wanted something I had never expected to want. The worst part was that 6 months earlier, I hadn't even known Mason's name. 6 months earlier, Ryan Bennett was simply the quiet man who lived 2 houses down from me, and Mason was the little boy I occasionally saw racing a red bicycle along the sidewalk, while his father reminded him not to go past the stop sign. I knew almost nothing about them. Ryan left every weekday around 7 in the morning wearing a pressed button-down shirt and carrying a travel mug, and he returned every evening with Mason beside him, usually balancing grocery bags, a backpack, and whatever unexpected responsibility parenthood had handed him that day. There was something almost mechanical about their routine. Ryan made breakfast, packed lunch, drove Mason to school, went to work, picked him up, made dinner, checked homework, and somehow found enough energy to throw a baseball around the backyard before sunset. He never complained. More importantly, he never asked anyone for help. That changed on a rainy Monday morning in March. I was carrying a bag of trash toward the curb when I heard the unmistakable clicking of an engine refusing to start. Ryan was sitting behind the wheel of his dark blue sport utility vehicle, while Mason waited in the back seat wearing a dinosaur backpack nearly as large as he was. Ryan tried the ignition again. Nothing. He leaned forward until his forehead nearly touched the steering wheel. I probably should have kept walking. Instead, I crossed the wet driveway and tapped lightly on his window. Ryan looked up, startled, then lowered it. Everything okay? I asked. It will be. He tried the ignition again, apparently hoping the vehicle would support his argument. It did not. Mason leaned between the front seats. Dad, I have spelling first period. Ryan closed his eyes for half a second. I know, buddy. I pointed toward my car. I can drive you. Ryan immediately shook his head. That is okay. I will figure something out. The elementary school is 8 minutes away. You do not have to do that. I know. That seemed to confuse him more than the offer itself. Mason solved the problem for us. Please, Dad. I do not want to be late again. Ryan looked back at his son, then at me. His shoulders lowered slightly, as if accepting help required him to put down something heavy he had been carrying for years. Just the school, he said. Just the school, I promised. 5 minutes later, Mason was in my back seat, giving me detailed instructions despite the navigation system already showing the route. Ryan sat beside me with both hands wrapped around his travel mug. Turn right after the pharmacy, Mason announced. I know where the school is, Ryan said. I was telling Caleb. I glanced into the mirror. Good thing you are here. Mason grinned. Ryan tried not to. That was the first time I saw his serious expression crack. At a red light, I noticed his tie was slightly crooked, his coffee had gone untouched, and there were faint shadows beneath his eyes. For the first time, Ryan Bennett did not look like the composed neighbor who always had everything handled. He looked tired, human. When we reached school, Mason opened the door, then stopped. Thanks, Caleb. Anytime. Tomorrow too? Ryan turned around. Mason. What? His car works. I laughed before I could stop myself, and Ryan finally smiled. It was small, reluctant, but completely different from the polite expression he gave neighbors. Mason jumped out and hurried toward the entrance, leaving Ryan and me alone. Sorry about him, Ryan said. He talks before he thinks. I like him. Ryan watched Mason disappear through the school doors. Something softened in his face. He likes you too. I drove Ryan back home, and we barely spoke, but the silence no longer felt uncomfortable. Before getting out, he paused with one hand on the door. Thank you, Caleb. Really. You are welcome, Ryan. He nodded and walked toward his house. I thought that would be the end of it. Then the next morning, at exactly 7:15, my doorbell rang. Mason stood on my porch with his dinosaur backpack and a huge smile, while Ryan waited several steps behind him, looking mildly embarrassed. Dad says the repair shop needs another day, Mason announced. And I told him you said anytime. Ryan sighed. Apparently, he takes people very literally. I looked at Mason, then at Ryan, and reached for my car keys. Good thing I meant it. The repair shop needed one more day, but somehow Mason found reasons to keep me around long after Ryan got his car back. It started with a science project on a Thursday afternoon. I was checking my mail when Mason came running across the lawn carrying a cardboard box almost as wide as his chest. Caleb, do you know how volcanoes work? He asked. Enough to know they should probably stay outside. He considered that seriously. Dad said the same thing. Ryan appeared behind him carrying poster board and a grocery bag. Mason, we talked about inviting people without asking. I asked him. You asked him before you asked me. Mason looked at me as if his father had introduced an unnecessarily complicated rule. I tried not to laugh. I can help for an hour. Ryan hesitated, then stepped aside. 1 hour. 3 hours later, the Bennett kitchen looked like a craft store had exploded. There was baking soda on the counter, red food coloring on my sleeve, and a crooked cardboard volcano sitting in the middle of the table while Mason proudly explained magma chambers to anyone willing to listen. Ryan made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup because none of us had noticed dinner time arriving. That became the pattern. Mason always found a reason. The following Saturday, he appeared at my door holding a baseball glove. The week after that, he informed me that his school soccer team had a game and that spectators were scientifically proven to make players faster. I asked where he had learned that. I made it up, he admitted. So I went. Ryan was standing beside the field in a navy jacket, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. When he saw me, surprise crossed his face before he handed me one. I did not know if you took cream. Black is perfect. Lucky guess. Mason spotted us from the field and waved so enthusiastically that his coach had to remind him where the ball was. Ryan laughed, and I realized I was beginning to collect versions of him most people never saw. The exhausted father. The terrible cook who somehow made excellent grilled cheese. The man who hummed old country songs while washing dishes and denied doing it when I noticed. The father who kept every drawing Mason made, even the ones that appeared to be nothing more than green circles with legs. Ryan was still careful with me. He thanked me too often. He apologized whenever Mason asked for my help. He never assumed I would show up. Mason always assumed I would. That difference mattered more than I understood at the time. One Friday evening, I came over to help Mason finish a model of the solar system. Afterward, Ryan ordered pizza, and we watched an animated movie Mason insisted was not just for kids. Halfway through, Mason climbed between us on the couch. 20 minutes later, his head was resting against my shoulder, and his sock-covered feet were stretched across Ryan's lap. By the closing credits, he was asleep. Neither of us moved. The television painted the room in soft blue light, while rain tapped gently against the windows. Ryan looked down at his son, then across at me. "You know you do not have to keep doing this," he said quietly. "Doing what?" "Showing up every time he asks." I looked at Mason. "Maybe I want to." Ryan studied my face as though he was searching for the hidden cost of that answer. "He gets attached to people. You have mentioned that." "I mean it, Caleb." There was something underneath his words that I could not identify yet. Not suspicion, fear. Before I could ask, Mason shifted in his sleep and caught a fistful of my shirt, holding on without waking. Ryan stared at that tiny hand. His expression changed. For a second, every wall he kept between us seemed to disappear. I thought he might say something important. Instead, he whispered, "I should put him to bed." He carefully lifted Mason into his arms and carried him upstairs. I stayed on the couch, staring at the empty place beside me and wondering why the room suddenly felt different. When Ryan returned, he stopped in the doorway. He has not trusted someone this quickly in a long time. Is that a bad thing? Ryan looked toward the stairs before meeting my eyes. I do not know yet. That should have warned me. Instead, all I could think about was how natural the evening had felt. Pizza boxes on the counter. A sleeping child between us. 2 cups beside the couch. Somewhere along the way, without asking permission from either of us, Mason had stopped treating me like the neighbor. And I was beginning to realize that I had stopped feeling like one. After that rainy Friday night, I started noticing evidence of myself inside the Bennett house. At first, it was nothing important. A black ceramic coffee mug appeared beside Ryan's favorite blue one because he remembered I never liked drinking from the small cups in his cabinet. A spare phone charger showed up near the couch after mine died during one of Mason's movie nights. Then there was the hook beside the front door where Mason began hanging my jacket whenever I forgot and left it over a chair. None of us discussed these things. They simply appeared, quiet little signs that I was no longer visiting so much as gradually becoming expected. By late spring, I knew Mason hated broccoli unless Ryan covered it with enough cheese to make identifying the vegetable nearly impossible. I knew he needed the hallway light left on until he fell asleep. I knew Ryan drank 2 cups of coffee every morning, but almost never finished the second because something involving Mason always interrupted him. Ryan learned things about me too. He knew I preferred pancakes slightly overdone around the edges. He knew I called my mother every Sunday afternoon. He knew that when I said I was fine too quickly, I usually was not. The strangest part was how ordinary it all felt. There was no dramatic moment when Ryan invited me into their lives. Instead, there were dozens of small moments. A text asking if I wanted dinner. A grocery run where Mason insisted I push the cart. A Saturday morning when Ryan handed me a travel mug before Mason's soccer game without asking what I wanted in it. One afternoon, I arrived for dinner and found 3 plates already set on the table. Mason pointed proudly at the chair beside Ryan. "That is yours." Ryan looked embarrassed. "Apparently, we have assigned seating now. It is efficient," Mason explained. I sat down, pretending the simple statement had not landed somewhere deep inside me. A few weeks later, I stayed later than usual after Mason fell asleep. Ryan and I were sitting on the back porch while the neighborhood settled into that soft summer quiet that comes after 9 in the evening. Porch lights glowed along the street. Somewhere nearby, sprinklers clicked across a lawn. Ryan had changed out of his work clothes and was wearing an old gray sweatshirt, looking younger and less guarded than usual. "He asks about you when you are not here," Ryan said. "Mason?" "No, the mailman." I laughed. Ryan smiled into his coffee. "Yes, Mason. What does he ask?" "Mostly when you are coming back." Something about the way Ryan said it made me look at him. "Does that bother you?" He was quiet for several seconds. It scares me. I expected him to change the subject, but he continued. Mason has not trusted anyone this quickly since he was little. His fingers tightened around the mug. It has been just the two of us for a long time. I know how to handle that. I know the rules. And now he saves you a seat. Ryan gave a quiet laugh, but there was sadness behind it. He tells his teacher about you. He asked me yesterday if you could come to family reading day at school. I looked down at my hands. What did you tell him? I said we would ask you. Then ask me. Ryan looked directly at me. Would you come? Of course. His expression softened, and for a moment neither of us looked away. The space between our chairs suddenly felt much smaller than it was. I could hear the faint hum of the porch light and the distant sound of a car passing at the end of the block. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again. What? I asked. Nothing. That did not look like nothing. He smiled, almost nervously. I was going to say I am glad you moved onto this street. It was such a simple sentence, but Ryan said it like admitting something dangerous. I am glad too. The back door opened before either of us could say more. Mason stood there in dinosaur pajamas, rubbing one eye. I cannot sleep. Ryan stood immediately. Bad dream. Mason shook his head, walked past him, and climbed into the empty chair between us. He leaned against Ryan first, then stretched one foot across until it rested against my leg. Within minutes, his eyes were closed. Ryan looked at me over Mason's head, and there it was again, that quiet, impossible feeling neither of us knew how to name. 3 chairs, 3 mugs, 3 people sitting beneath one porch light. I remember thinking that families probably did not always begin with promises. Sometimes they began with an extra plate at dinner, a saved seat, and a little boy who had already decided there was room for one more person long before the adults were brave enough to admit it. By the time September arrived, being part of Ryan and Mason's mornings had become so normal that I stopped wondering when it had happened. That particular Tuesday started like dozens before it. I arrived shortly after 7 because Ryan had promised Mason homemade pancakes, and experience had taught all 3 of us that Ryan's definition of homemade occasionally required emergency assistance. Mason was already dressed for school, sitting at the kitchen table with his hair sticking up on one side, while he carefully poured too much syrup over a pancake shaped vaguely like Texas. It was supposed to be Mickey Mouse, Ryan said when he caught me looking. I can see it, I lied. No, you cannot, Mason said. Ryan pointed the spatula at him. Respect the chef. I poured myself coffee into the black mug that had somehow become mine. There was nothing extraordinary about the morning, and maybe that was why I remember it so clearly. Ryan complaining that Mason had forgotten to put his homework inside his backpack. Mason insisting that remembering where the homework was should count. Me packing apple slices into his lunchbox while Ryan searched for a missing sneaker. We moved around one another without instructions, like we had practiced this routine for years instead of months. 10 minutes before the school bus arrived, Ryan discovered Mason's other sneaker beneath the couch. Caleb, can you help him while I finish his lunch? He called from the kitchen. Already on it. Mason sat on the bench beside the front door while I knelt in front of him. I pulled the sneaker onto his foot and started tying the laces. He was unusually quiet. What is going on in that head? I asked, thinking, that is dangerous. He ignored the joke. Caleb, yeah. His small hand settled on my shoulder. When I looked up, his expression was completely serious. Are you my new daddy? Everything inside me stopped. For months, Mason had been pulling me closer in ways that seemed harmless individually. A soccer game, a science project, a chair at dinner, a place on the porch. I had let myself believe those moments did not require a name. Mason had just given them one. Somewhere behind me, a cabinet door closed. I turned slightly and saw Ryan standing at the kitchen entrance with Mason's blue lunchbox in his hand. His face had gone still. Mason followed my gaze. Dad, Ryan walked toward us slowly. Where did that question come from, buddy? Family reading day? Mason shrugged. Noah has 2 dads. Caleb comes to my school things and eats dinner here and helps me with homework. He does dad stuff. My throat tightened. Children could make enormous truths sound incredibly simple. Ryan looked at me, and for one second I saw something hopeful beneath the fear in his eyes. I wanted to tell Mason that labels were complicated. I wanted to explain that adults sometimes needed more time than children to understand what was already obvious. But beneath all those reasonable answers was the one word I wanted to say most. Yes, Ryan answered before I could. No, The word was quiet, but the entire house seemed to change around it. Mason blinked. Oh, Ryan immediately softened his voice. Mason, Caleb is very important to us, but that does not make him your dad. Okay. Mason looked down at his sneaker. I finished the knot even though my fingers suddenly felt clumsy. Outside, the school bus turned onto the street. Mason grabbed his backpack and lunchbox. Usually he hugged Ryan before leaving and shouted something ridiculous at me from the porch. That morning he simply said, "Bye," and walked outside. Ryan and I followed. We waved as the bus pulled away, but neither of us spoke until it disappeared around the corner. "Caleb," Ryan began. "You do not have to explain." "Yes, I do." I turned toward him. "Then explain." He looked through the open front door at the kitchen where 3 breakfast plates were still sitting on the table. "He is getting attached." "I know." "No, you do not." His voice remained calm, but his fear was finally visible. "You see dinners and soccer games. I see what happens if he starts believing you will always be here." That hurt more than I expected. "And what exactly do you think I have been doing?" Ryan looked at me, but said nothing. "I keep showing up because I want to be here. Wanting something now is not the same as promising forever." I never said it was. That is the problem. The distance between us was barely 3 feet, but suddenly it felt wider than the entire street. Ryan lowered his eyes. I cannot let him build his whole heart around someone who might leave. Then I understood. His answer had never really been about what Mason called me. Ryan was afraid because the 3 of us had begun to feel like a family, and somewhere along the way, that possibility had become more frightening to him than being alone. For the next 2 weeks, Ryan became very good at making distance look reasonable. He never told me to stay away. That would have been easier. Instead, the invitations simply stopped. No message asking whether I wanted pizza on Friday. No reminder about Saturday soccer practice. No photograph from Mason showing me whatever impossible structure he had built from cardboard and tape. When I saw Ryan outside, he was polite, almost painfully so. "Morning, Caleb." "Morning, Ryan." Then he would get into his car and drive away. The first few days, I told myself he needed space. By the second week, I understood that space was exactly what he was creating. The Bennett house was only 2 houses away, yet it suddenly felt farther than anywhere I had ever been. I miss stupid things. Ryan's terrible pancakes. Mason leaving crayons on every available surface. My black mug beside Ryan's blue one. One Thursday evening, Ryan stood alone in his kitchen after Mason had gone upstairs to brush his teeth. The house was quiet again, exactly the way Ryan had once believed he wanted it. He opened a cabinet and saw my mug. He stared at it for several seconds before closing the door. Then he noticed something beneath a pile of school papers on the counter. It was a drawing Mason had made with colored pencils. 3 figures stood beneath a huge yellow sun. Ryan was on the left in a blue shirt. Mason was in the middle, smiling so widely that his face was mostly teeth. I was on the right, drawn slightly taller than everyone else for reasons known only to Mason. Above us, in uneven purple letters, Mason had written, "Me and my dad's." Ryan sat down. He should have corrected it. He should have folded the paper and put it away with the dozens of other drawings he saved. Instead, he kept staring at it. Mason appeared at the kitchen entrance wearing dinosaur pajamas. "You found it." Ryan looked up. "When did you draw this?" "At school." Mason climbed onto the chair across from him. "Mrs. Carter said draw your family." Ryan looked back at the picture. "Buddy, we talked about Caleb." "I know. Then why did you draw him?" Mason frowned as though the answer was obvious. "Because he is family." Ryan's expression tightened. "Family means people who stay." Caleb stayed. He has only known us for a few months. You told him not to come anymore. Ryan froze. I never told him that. You stopped asking. Mason looked down at the table. That is kind of the same thing. Ryan had no answer. The next afternoon, I was bringing groceries inside when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting Mason. It was Ryan. He stopped at the end of my driveway with his hands in his jacket pockets. "Can we talk?" I set the grocery bag down inside my doorway. "Sure." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ryan said, "Mason thinks I told you not to come around." "Did you?" "No. You did not have to." He looked away. I thought some distance would help. "Help who?" "Him." "Are you sure?" That brought his eyes back to mine. I had spent 2 weeks rehearsing everything I wanted to say, but when Ryan stood there, looking more tired than I had ever seen him, anger felt less useful than truth. You keep saying Mason might get hurt if I leave. But you never asked whether I planned to leave. Ryan swallowed. People plan things all the time, Caleb. Life changes. Of course it does. I stepped closer, but left enough space between us that the choice to close it would have to be his. But you cannot protect him from every possible goodbye by never letting anyone become important. You do not understand. Then help me understand. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. I can survive someone leaving me, he finally said. I do not know if Mason can. There it was. Not control. Not rejection. Fear. Ryan, I care about him. I know. And I care about you. His eyes closed briefly. When they opened, the fear was still there, but so was something else. That is what makes this harder. He left before I could answer. Later that night, Ryan returned to the kitchen table and picked up Mason's drawing again. He did not throw it away. He did not hide it in a drawer. He placed it on the refrigerator beneath a small magnet shaped like a baseball. Then he stood back and looked at those three crooked figures beneath the yellow sun, finally beginning to understand that removing someone from the room did not remove the place they had already made in your life. The invitation appeared in my mailbox on Monday afternoon, printed on pale blue paper with a row of crooked gold stars across the top. Mason's elementary school was holding its fall family showcase on Friday evening, and every student had been given 2 guest tickets. Someone had written my name across one ticket in purple marker. Not Mr. Morgan. Not Caleb Morgan. Just Caleb, in Mason's unmistakable, uneven handwriting. I stood beside my mailbox longer than I should have, staring at it. Ryan and I had barely spoken since our conversation in my driveway. He had admitted he was afraid, and I had admitted I cared about him, but neither confession had changed the distance between us. I wanted to go. That was the problem. I wanted to walk into that school, sit beside Ryan, and watch Mason search the audience until he found both of us. But wanting a place in their lives was not the same as being invited into it by Ryan. So on Friday evening, while families filled the elementary school auditorium, I stayed home. Ryan sat in the 3rd row with an empty folding chair beside him. Mason had chosen those seats himself. Caleb likes the aisle, he had explained. Ryan had not corrected him. At 6:30, the program began. Children walked onto the small stage carrying posters about their families, favorite traditions, and hopes for the future. Ryan tried to focus, but every time the auditorium doors opened, his eyes moved toward them. The empty chair beside him seemed to grow more noticeable with every minute. When Mason's class finally appeared, Ryan straightened. Mason stood near the end of the line wearing a green sweater and holding a large poster against his chest. He found Ryan immediately. His face brightened, then his eyes moved to the chair beside him. The smile changed. It did not disappear completely. That somehow made it worse. Mason stepped forward when his name was called. My family likes pancakes, he began, reading carefully from his poster. Several parents laughed softly. My dad makes them funny shapes, but they do not look like the shapes he says. Ryan lowered his head with a helpless smile. We also like soccer and movies and grilled cheese. My dad says family means people who stay and take care of each other. Mason paused. His eyes moved toward the empty seat again. I think family can also be people who keep showing up. Ryan stopped smiling. On Mason's poster were 3 simple drawings. One was Ryan. One was Mason. The 3rd was me. Ryan stared at that paper while something inside him finally shifted. He had spent weeks telling himself he was protecting Mason from the possibility of losing me. Yet Mason was already hurting because Ryan had made my absence happen before life ever had the chance to. When the presentation ended, Ryan waited until Mason returned to his teacher. He crouched beside him. You did great, buddy. Thanks. Mason glanced toward the auditorium. Caleb did not come. Ryan looked at the 2nd ticket still tucked into Mason's pocket. Did you give him this? I put one in his mailbox. Did you tell him I wanted him here? Mason hesitated. No. Ryan closed his eyes. Of course I had stayed away. He had spent 2 weeks teaching me that staying away was exactly what he wanted. I need to fix something, Ryan said. Are you leaving? For a little while. Mrs. Carter is going to stay with you until I get back. Mason studied him. Are you going to Caleb's house? Ryan nodded. For the first time that evening, Mason smiled without forcing it. I was sitting on my front steps when Ryan's car turned onto the street. I had tried reading. I had tried watching television. Eventually, I had given up and gone outside with Mason's ticket still folded in my pocket. Ryan parked badly, leaving one tire several inches from the curb, which told me more about his state of mind than his expression did. He got out and walked toward me. "You should be at the showcase," I said. "So should you." I stood. "Ryan, I did not think you wanted me there." "I know." He stopped at the bottom of my steps, breathing hard as though he had spent the entire drive rehearsing words that no longer seemed good enough. I saw the empty chair. I said nothing. I thought I was protecting Mason. His voice softened. But tonight he looked at that chair, and I realized I was the reason it was empty. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the ticket. Ryan looked at Mason's purple handwriting. "He saved you a seat," he whispered. "He always does." Ryan lifted his eyes to mine. The fear was still there, but this time he was not hiding behind it. "Caleb, I do not want that seat empty anymore." For a moment, I could only look at Ryan. The porch light cast a warm circle around us while the rest of the street settled into the quiet of an ordinary Friday night, and somehow that made his words feel even bigger. "What are you saying?" I asked. Ryan glanced toward the folded ticket in my hand. "I am saying I was wrong." I had imagined hearing that for 2 weeks, but now that he was standing in front of me, I needed more than an apology. "Wrong about what?" Ryan drew in a slow breath. "About you. About Mason. About what I thought I was protecting." He stepped closer. "I kept telling myself I was afraid you would hurt him, but that was not really it." His voice dropped. "I was afraid you would hurt me." I searched his face. Ryan shook his head almost immediately. "No, that is not even true." He gave a quiet, frustrated laugh. "I was not afraid you would hurt me, Caleb. I was afraid Mason would call you Dad. I would let myself believe we could actually have this. And then one day you would disappear." The honesty in his voice stripped away every defense I had prepared. "So you decided how our story ended before you ever let me choose it." Ryan lowered his eyes. "Yes. You pushed me away because you were afraid I might leave. I know how ridiculous that sounds." "It does not sound ridiculous. It sounds lonely." That made him look at me again. For months, I had watched Ryan handle everything alone because being needed was easier for him than needing someone. "You never had to promise me nothing would change," I said. "Life changes. People change. But you could have asked what I wanted." "What do you want?" The question came so quietly that I almost missed it. I looked at the house 2 doors down, where Mason's bedroom window would still be dark because he was waiting at school with his teacher. Then I looked back at Ryan. "I want Saturday soccer games. I want your terrible pancakes. I want Mason interrupting every movie to explain scenes we are already watching. I want that black mug in your cabinet. I want you texting me because you forgot milk, even though the grocery store is 3 minutes away." Ryan smiled despite himself. "It is closer to 5. That is what you took from that." His smile faded into something softer. "Keep going." My heart beat harder. "I want to be there when things are easy, and I want you to stop assuming I will disappear when they are not." Ryan's eyes glistened beneath the porch light. "And me?" There was nowhere left to hide. "I want you to." Ryan closed the remaining distance between us, but he stopped before touching me, giving me the choice he had denied both of us for weeks. I reached for his hand. His fingers closed around mine, warm and uncertain. "I love you, Caleb," he said. There was no grand speech after it. Ryan Bennett simply stood on my front porch and said the truth. "I think I have for longer than I wanted to admit." I squeezed his hand. "I love you too." His shoulders lowered as though he had finally set down something he had been carrying alone for years. He leaned forward, and our first kiss was brief and gentle, more promise than passion. When we separated, Ryan rested his forehead against mine and laughed softly. "Mason is going to be unbearable about this. He already thinks he arranged the whole thing." He probably did. Ryan looked toward his car, then back at me. "Come with me." "To the school?" "Yes." "Ryan, the showcase is probably almost over. Then we will catch whatever is left." He hesitated, and I saw the old fear flicker across his face one final time. This time he did not retreat from it. "I am not asking you to replace anyone. I am not asking you to make promises tonight that nobody can guarantee." His hand tightened around mine. "I am asking whether you will come home with me." Home. Not his house. Not Mason's school. Home. I picked up my jacket from the porch railing. Yes. When we reached the school, most families were already leaving. Mason was sitting beside Mrs. Carter near the auditorium doors. He saw Ryan first, then noticed me beside him. His entire face lit up. He ran toward us, stopping only when he noticed our joined hands. Mason looked at Ryan, then at me, then back at our hands. A slow, victorious smile spread across his face. "I knew it," he said. Ryan sighed. "Please do not make this weird." Mason grinned wider. Too late. And for the first time, when the three of us walked out together, Ryan did not look afraid of what we might become. 3 months later, I woke to the smell of something burning and Mason shouting from downstairs that breakfast was experiencing an emergency. I hurried into the kitchen and found Ryan standing over the stove with a spatula in one hand and a pancake that looked like a map of California folded over itself in the skillet. Mason sat at the table laughing so hard he could barely drink his orange juice. "Do not say anything," Ryan warned me. I opened the cabinet and reached for my black mug. It no longer felt strange seeing it there. Neither did my coffee beside Ryan's, my jacket hanging near the front door, or the extra pair of shoes Mason constantly complained about tripping over. I had officially moved into the Bennett house 6 weeks earlier. We had not rushed it. Ryan needed to learn that building a life with someone did not mean surrendering control of everything he had protected, and I needed to understand that loving Ryan meant respecting the years he and Mason had spent as a team of two. So we moved slowly. One drawer became two. Two drawers became half a closet. Eventually, Mason made a handwritten sign for the guest room that said Caleb's office, which apparently settled the matter permanently. That morning was a school day, which meant the house operated somewhere between routine and complete confusion. Ryan packed Mason's lunch while I searched for a missing library book. Mason insisted he had placed it somewhere safe, which usually meant nobody would find it for a week. I eventually discovered it beneath the couch beside a red crayon and one lonely sock. "Found it. I knew where it was," Mason said. "Then why did you let me search for 10 minutes? You looked busy." Ryan laughed into his coffee. I pointed at him. "You are encouraging this. I have been dealing with him longer than you have. I learned to choose my battles." After breakfast, Mason disappeared upstairs to brush his teeth. I started clearing the table when I noticed a familiar piece of paper beneath a stack of schoolwork. The edges were worn now, but I recognized the giant yellow sun immediately. 3 crooked figures stood beneath it. Ryan, Mason, and me. "You kept this?" I asked. Ryan glanced over. "Of course. You almost hit it." "I almost hit a lot of things." He stepped beside me and looked at the drawing. "I'm trying not to do that anymore." His hand found mine on the counter. 3 months earlier, that simple touch would have made him nervous. Now it felt as ordinary as coffee. Mason came running downstairs carrying his backpack. He stopped when he saw the picture. "Hey, that is my old one." "Old?" I asked. "I draw better now." He took the paper from me and examined it critically. "Your head is too big. That feels unnecessary." Mason ignored me. Then his expression changed as if he had remembered something important. "Caleb." "What?" "Remember when I asked you that question before school?" Ryan went very still beside me. I knew exactly which morning Mason meant. "I remember." Mason adjusted one strap of his backpack. "You never answered." The kitchen became quiet. Months ago, I had wanted to say yes because my heart had reached an answer before my life had caught up with it. Now there was no fear in the silence. I looked at Ryan. I was not asking permission, but I needed him to be part of this moment. His eyes softened, and he gave me one small nod. I crouched until I was at Mason's height. "Do you still want an answer?" Mason nodded. "Then yes," I said, "if you still want me to be." For once, Mason Bennett had absolutely nothing to say. His eyes filled with tears before he threw his arms around my neck. I held him close, feeling Ryan's hand settle gently on my shoulder. "Does this mean I get 2 dads at parent conferences?" Mason asked against my shirt. Ryan laughed. "Unfortunately for you, yes." Mason pulled back and considered this new information. "That might be bad." "Very bad," I agreed. "We can compare notes." I changed my mind. "Too late," Ryan said. 10 minutes later, we were scrambling toward the front door because the school bus was approaching. Mason ran onto the porch, then suddenly turned around. "Dad, I forgot my lunchbox." Ryan and I both answered at exactly the same time. On the counter, Mason stared at us. Then a delighted grin spread across his face. "I meant both of you." Ryan looked at me and laughed. I handed Mason his lunchbox, and the 3 of us stepped outside into the cool morning. There was no dramatic music, no perfect promise that life would always be easy. There was a school bus waiting at the curb, coffee getting cold on the kitchen counter, and another ordinary day beginning. That was what I had finally learned about family. Sometimes it did not arrive all at once. Sometimes it was built quietly, one breakfast, one saved seat, one difficult conversation, and one decision to stay at a time.